I didn't see it coming. Not even a little. I mean, how could I? One minute, I was sitting at the dinner table, soaking in the quiet after a long day, taking a breath before the next grind. And then Melanie, my wife of 20 years, looked me dead in the eye and said it. I'm going out to dinner with a colleague. At first, it barely registered. Just words, floating in the air. Nothing unusual, right? Harmless. But then my brain caught up. This wasn't just dinner. Not a quick bite with a coworker, not some casual team outing. No, this was a date. A full-fledged, no pretense, no excuses date with some guy from work. And she said it like it was nothing. Like I wouldn't notice. Like I wouldn't care. I felt something twist in my gut. Let me back up a little. Melanie and I got married young. She was 22, fresh-faced, naive, and pregnant. We had no idea what we were doing, but we did it anyway. That's how it goes, right? You take the leap and hope for the best. Looking back now, I swear, young people today seem so much more put together than we ever were. But at the time, it felt like the right move. And honestly, it wasn't all bad. We had some good years. After we tied the knot, I threw myself into work. Numbers had always been my thing, so I built a business around them. And I made it work. I turned it into something real, something successful. Before long, we weren't just comfortable, we were set. Melanie never had to worry about a thing. Our life was something people envied, but all the money in the world couldn't fix what came next. We had a son, our pride and joy, and he was sick from the start, really sick. And let me tell you, there's nothing worse than watching your child suffer, knowing that no amount of money, no doctor, no miracle cure is going to save him. That kind of helplessness, it doesn't fade. It carves itself into you, settles into the cracks of who you are. It stays. We fought for years, but in the end, we lost him. And Melanie? She changed. She withdrew. And I get it. Grief does that to people. But she didn't just shut down. She shut me out completely. On paper, we were still married. In reality, we were just two strangers living in the same house. I tried everything. Therapy, vacations, taking time off work, anything to bring her back. But nothing worked. For years, she moved through the house like a ghost, unreachable. Psychologists spent months just trying to get her to open up. Eventually, she did. A little. But she was never the same. And honestly, I stopped believing she ever would be. And then there we were, at the dinner table. And she dropped that bomb. She was going out with him. And the way she said it, so casual, so unbothered, made my skin crawl. He's just a friend, she said. He's been really supportive. I just need someone to talk to. Right. Just talking. Like I hadn't heard that before. I'd already noticed the changes, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. She was different. More energy. More smiles. Like something in her had woken up. And now I knew why. She gave him the credit. This guy. This colleague. I sat there, staring at her, my mind blank. How the hell do you even respond to that? Your wife, the woman you build a life with, just sits across from you and casually announces she's going on a date with another man. I didn't want to explode. Didn't want to argue. So, I stood up and walked out. No keys. No phone. Just walked. She chased after me, her voice raw with desperation. Wait, she called, her footsteps quick behind me. It's not like that. Please, just listen. But what could she possibly say that would make this okay? That it wasn't cheating? That this was normal? She kept pleading, swearing up and down that I was blowing it out of proportion. And then she hit me with the kicker. He makes me feel alive again. I stopped. Alive. She needed this. Needed what, exactly? A dinner? A conversation? A man who wasn't me? I clenched my jaw so hard it ached, but I stayed silent. I already knew one thing. If I told her not to go, she'd go anyway. Melanie's always been like that. She gets what she wants, no matter the cost. The problem is, she never stops to think about how high the price might be. I needed to figure out my next move. There was no way in hell I was just letting this slide. I'd put up with a lot over the years. But this was a line I couldn't ignore. So, I made a call. A buddy of mine has connections, the kind of people who know how to dig. I told him what was happening, and by the next day, he had me set up with a private investigator. I wanted everything. Who this guy was. How he lived. What his real intentions were. I wanted to know where they went. What they talked about. What they did. And yeah, I wanted pictures. Proof. Because deep down, I already knew. This wasn't just dinner. I felt it in my gut. And I wasn't about to sit back and let my life fall apart without knowing exactly what was happening behind my back. So I waited. Waited to find out who he was. Waited to see what Melanie was really up to. Waited to figure out how the hell I was going to deal with it. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just confront her right then and there? Because sometimes, you don't react. You wait. You let the truth come to you. And when it does, you hit back hard. The detective didn't waste any time. A few days later, he had the first bit of intel. The guy's name? Calvin. Yeah, Calvin. It's always some guy with a plain, boring name, isn't it? But don't let that fool you. Calvin wasn't just some office nobody. He had a family, a wife, 2 kids, a respectable job, lived in a big house, one of those suburban McMansions with a white picket fence, a neatly trimmed lawn, probably even a golden retriever running around the yard. Picture perfect. But you know what they say about appearances. People like Calvin? They're always hiding something, and I was about to find out exactly what. The detective didn't just give me the basics, he went deep. I had it all. His home address, his kid's school, his wife's job, the car he drove, everything, laid out in front of me like a dossier on the man who, apparently, had been so supportive of my wife. She dressed up for him. That was the part one couldn't shake. I sat there, staring at his photo, trying to make sense of it. Calvin. Plain, average, middle-aged Calvin. The kind of guy who probably spent his weekends drinking beer in front of a football game, not creeping around with another man's wife. But looks can be deceiving. And I wasn't taking any chances. I wasn't stupid. Melanie wasn't telling me everything, and I wasn't about to sit around, waiting for her to come clean. I needed answers. And I needed payback. See, when you have the kind of money I do, you don't just wait for the truth to come to you. You make things happen. This wasn't about the cost. It wasn't about being reasonable. This was about pride, about revenge, about knowing exactly what was going on behind my back and making damn sure neither of them got away with it. So, I put things in motion. My next move required a certain type of person, and I knew just who to call. Elliot owed me. A long time ago, I helped him out of a situation that could have gone sideways fast. He never forgot that. So when I called him and laid it all out, he didn't ask questions. He just said, I got you. And within hours, he had the perfect solution. A woman. She was young, 27, maybe 28, blonde, legs for days. The kind of face that could make a man forget he had a family waiting at home. When Elliot showed me her picture, I didn't even hesitate. She was exactly what I needed. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. You probably have a pretty good idea what her line of work is, but let's not spell it out. I know how these platforms operate, and I'm not about to get flagged. Let's just say she was very professional, and she knew exactly how to handle men like Calvin. But that was only part of the plan. I wasn't just setting Calvin up. I needed everything. So, I kept the private investigator on Melanie. This wasn't just about one date. I wanted the full picture. I needed to know where she went, who she was with, and what else she might be lying about. Because once I had proof, there'd be no coming back from it. Calvin was going to slip. Guys like him always do. And when he did, I'd be right there. Watching. Waiting. Ready. Then, just when everything was lining up, Melanie flipped the script. We were in the kitchen. I was playing it cool, acting like I wasn't orchestrating her downfall in the background. She looked up from her phone and said it, just like she was commenting on what we were having for dinner. I've been thinking. I'm not going to meet Calvin tomorrow after all. For a second, I thought I misheard her. She wasn't going? After all the effort I had put in? After everything I had lined up? All the moving parts perfectly timed? What the hell was happening? I forced myself to stay calm. Oh, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Why not? She hesitated. Just for a second, then shrugged like it was nothing. I just changed my mind. I don't think it's appropriate. Instead, she said, she was meeting a friend. Dinner. A new restaurant downtown. I kept my expression even, but my mind was racing. Something didn't sit right. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she realized how messed up it would be to go through with it. But the way she said it, something was off. Was it still Calvin? Or was there someone else? I knew better than to press. If I pushed too hard, she'd get suspicious. So, I just nodded. Let her think I believed her. But deep down, I wasn't buying it. Not for a second. And I sure as hell wasn't calling off my plans. Because whatever she was up to, whether it was Calvin or someone else, I was going to find out. She could change her story all she wanted. At this point, I had too much invested to turn back. So, I sat there, acting like I didn't have a clue. While behind the scenes, the wheels kept turning. Melanie was going to slip. And when she did, I'd be ready. Turns out, my instincts were dead on. She was still meeting Calvin. Whatever she had told me in the kitchen. Just words. Her actions spoke louder. The detective sent over an update. She had booked a table. A nice restaurant. The kind of place we used to go when things were good. But that wasn't the part that set me off. No. It was what came next. She had also rented a hotel room. And not just any room. A $400 a night suite. The kind of room you don't book just to talk. I gripped my phone so tight my knuckles turned white. I didn't need anyone to explain what was happening. Dinner. Drinks. And then, a night in that expensive hotel with Calvin. I could feel my blood boiling just picturing it. But I couldn't afford to lose it. Not now. This wasn't the time to let anger take over. This was the time to act. First move. I had one of the detectives stake out Calvin's house. I needed to know if Calvin's wife was home while my wife was out screwing around with him. This wasn't just about catching them. I wanted to burn it all down. So, I waited. And that's the worst part. Knowing what's happening. Knowing what's about to happen. And having to sit there, pretending like you don't know a damn thing. Then, finally, the first piece of proof came in. A photo. Melanie, sitting at the table with Calvin, smiling, laughing, looking comfortable, looking happy, like she didn't have a husband waiting for her at home. But that wasn't what set me off. No. The next photo did that. The one where they were kissing. Right there. In the middle of the restaurant. Like they didn't have a single care in the world. Like what they were doing was perfectly normal. Like I didn't even exist. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might crack. I wanted to break something. Smash something. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. This was just the beginning. I knew damn well they weren't stopping at dinner. The hotel room was waiting. A $400 a night suite booked in advance, ready and waiting for them. There was no doubt in my mind where they were headed next. But before they got there, I had one more move to make. I pulled out my phone and dialed the detective stationed outside Calvin's house. She home? I asked, referring to Calvin's wife. A brief pause, then, yeah, she's home. Perfect. That was all I needed. I forwarded the detective the photo, the one of Calvin and Melanie, caught mid-kiss, completely oblivious to the world around them. Then, I gave him very specific instructions. And let me tell you, nothing, not even seeing that picture for myself, compared to the satisfaction I felt knowing exactly how this was about to play out. I pictured it clearly. Calvin's wife, unsuspecting, answering the door. Probably expecting something routine, maybe a neighbor, maybe a package delivery. What she got was anything but. The detective didn't waste time on pleasantries. He got straight to the point. Do you know where your husband is? She probably blinked, thrown off by the question. He's working late, she might have said, confusion settling in. Of course, he was. That was his go-to excuse. The same line he probably used 100 times before. So, the detective asked again, pressing just enough to stir the first flickers of doubt. And that's when I imagined the panic setting in. The fear. She would have started running through the possibilities in her head. Was he in an accident? Did something happen? The detective must have seen it in her face because that's when he reassured her. No, he's fine, he said. But I think you should see this. Then he handed her the photo. Calvin, kissing Melanie, right there. Plain as day. I could only imagine the look on her face, the moment everything she thought she knew about her life shattered right there on the doorstep. Maybe she stammered. Maybe she tried to convince herself there had to be some mistake. But the detective wasn't there to entertain delusions. Her husband wasn't working late. He was on a date. And just like that, the storm began. As soon as the detective walked away, I knew exactly what was coming next. Calvin's wife would grab her phone, hand shaking, and start dialing. And when Calvin saw her name pop up on his screen, right there in the middle of his little romantic evening, I bet his heart stopped. I pictured him excusing himself, stepping away, fumbling for some excuse, trying to calm her down. But she wouldn't be having any of it. No, she'd be in full meltdown mode, demanding answers, tearing his whole story apart piece by piece. And, just as I expected, Calvin would panic. He'd realize the walls were closing in. And he'd do exactly what I wanted him to do. Rush home. Desperate to fix his mess. And while Calvin's world was imploding, I was sitting at home, waiting for Melanie to come back. I held the picture in my hand, the one of her, lips locked with another man. And that was it. That was the last time I felt anything for her. The love? Gone. The respect? Dead. The anger, though? That was still burning. And I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Because this wasn't just about catching her in the act. This wasn't just about humiliating Calvin. This was about dismantling everything. Melanie thought she was clever. Thought she could pull this off without consequences. But she didn't realize who she was dealing with. I'd spent years building a business, making connections, learning how to turn situations to my advantage. And this was just another problem that needed solving. And when I was done, Melanie and Calvin were going to regret every single decision that led them to that dinner table. The final move was already in play. Remember the blonde? The one with the flawless hair, the legs that didn't quit, the body that could make a man forget his own damn name? Yeah, she wasn't just some random girl. She was the final piece. When Melanie left for her date, the blonde was already waiting at my house. And let me tell you, she looked even better in person. She wore a sleek, tight dress, the kind that left very little to the imagination. We sat down, had some wine. To be honest, I needed the wine more than she did. Not from nerves. Not from second thoughts. From anticipation. From knowing exactly how this was about to go down. See, it's not every day you plan to cheat on your wife, even for revenge. But then again, was it even cheating at this point? Could you call it that when she had already torched our marriage beyond repair? Because I didn't feel guilt. Not one bit. This wasn't betrayal. This was payback. After a couple more glasses, we headed upstairs. And let me be clear, there was nothing romantic about what happened next. This wasn't passion. It wasn't love. Hell, it wasn't even lust. It was business. A transaction. Something that needed to be done to close the loop on what Melanie had started. The blonde? She was good at what she did. But my mind? It wasn't there. It wasn't on her. It wasn't even on Melanie. It was just going through the motions. And the only thought running through my head, the only thing that mattered, was what Melanie's face would look like when she walked through that door. Right on schedule, I heard the front door open. I heard the soft creak as it swung in, the slow shuffle of her footsteps moving through the hallway. We didn't stop, didn't pause, didn't hesitate. I wanted her to walk in on this. I wanted her to see it all. And then, there she was, standing in the doorway, frozen, her breath caught, her eyes wide, face pale like she had just walked into the middle of a crime scene. And maybe she had. Because this was the moment her world collapsed. Melanie screamed, a raw, gut-wrenching sound that ripped through the room. It wasn't just anger. It was shock. It was horror. It was her finally realizing this wasn't just some argument we'd get past. This was the end. The blonde? She didn't linger. She got dressed faster than I thought humanly possible, slipping out the front door without so much as a glance back. She knew her job was done. And now, it was just me and Melanie. Alone. Left to deal with the fallout. I'd seen Melanie angry before. But this was something else. She lost it. She screamed at me. Accused me of betrayal. As if she wasn't the one who had set this whole thing in motion. As if she hadn't burned us down first. As if, somehow, I was the reason our marriage was falling apart. And as she stood there, unraveling, saying anything and everything to take the blame off herself, I just watched. Because, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one being blindsided. I was the one in control. And I wasn't finished yet. Not even close. I laughed. Not because any of this was funny. There wasn't a damn thing funny about what had just happened. But there she was, standing in front of me, screaming like I was the one who had just ripped our marriage to shreds. Like I was the villain in this story. Like she hadn't just spent the night pressed up against Calvin in a candlelit restaurant, booking a hotel room, planning to sleep with him like a love-struck teenager sneaking around behind her parents' back. She was pacing, hands flying up, voice cracking, her face red with fury, cursing me, calling me every name she could think of. And I just stood there, silent, watching, waiting, letting her wear herself out, letting her run out of breath, letting her dig her own grave. Then, when she finally stopped, when she finally realized I wasn't fighting back, wasn't engaging, wasn't reacting, I pulled out my phone. I held it up, pressed the screen, and turned it toward her. The photo, the proof, her, Calvin, lips locked in the middle of a restaurant, completely lost in each other. Her entire body tensed, like she had been struck. The fire in her eyes flickered. The righteous anger drained from her face. And then, for the first time tonight, she shut up. She stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open, trying to form words. Nothing came out. I tilted my head, watching her struggle. And then I twisted the knife. I know about the hotel, I said. My voice is cold as steel. The one you rented for tonight. The one you thought you'd be spending with him. Her breath caught. The room went silent. And in that moment, I saw it. Real, genuine fear. Not fear of me. Fear of what came next. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again, tried to explain, to justify. But there was no justification, no excuse, no way to spin this. She had been caught, dead to rights. You're staying there tonight, I said, flat, emotionless. That hotel room she had booked? It wasn't going to waste. Not on my dime. Her eyes darted across my face, searching for something, remorse, weakness, an opening. She found nothing. So she did what people like her always do when they realize they've lost. She flipped the script. How could you? She screamed, her voice shaking. After everything we've been through? You're the one cheating now. How can you even look at yourself? I almost laughed again. Not out of amusement. Out of pure, exhausted disbelief. You think I'm the problem here? I asked, voice eerily calm. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, making sure she heard every single word. You went on a date with another man. You rented a hotel room to sleep with him. And now you want to stand here and play the victim? She swallowed, hard. Her fists clenched. Her face twisted in anger, in humiliation, in sheer desperation to make this my fault. But it wasn't working. Not this time. I wasn't playing her game anymore. I wasn't interested in hearing her try to justify the unjustifiable. I wasn't interested in listening to her rewrite history. She had burned this bridge. I was just making sure she never had the chance to rebuild it. She exhaled sharply, her breath shaking as she grabbed her purse, yanked her phone out of her pocket, and called a cab. I didn't stop her. Didn't say another word. I just watched. Watched her grab her things, her hands unsteady, her movements frantic. Watched her walk toward the door, shoulders stiff, spine straight, trying so damn hard to pretend like this wasn't her own doing. Watched her step outside, slamming the door behind her. And when she was gone, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No relief. No sense of victory. Just a dull, empty silence. Because revenge? It feels good in the moment, but it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't undo the betrayal. Doesn't bring back what's already lost. It just makes damn sure that they lose too. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because while she was sitting alone in that hotel room she had booked for Calvin, the next part of my plan, that was already in motion. And when I was done, she wouldn't just be humiliated. She'd be destroyed. Filing for divorce was the final nail in the coffin. After everything, the lies, the deceit, the sheer audacity, there was only one logical next step. I wasn't interested in fixing this. I wasn't interested in her tears, her apologies, or whatever pathetic attempt she was going to make to justify her actions. Our marriage didn't end tonight. It ended the second she stepped into that restaurant with Calvin. The rest? Just formalities. I didn't waste time. I called the best divorce lawyers money could buy. No half measures. No cutting corners. These weren't just attorneys. These were predators. The kind of men who didn't just win. They obliterated the opposition. And I made myself very clear. I wanted her gone. And I wanted to make damn sure she walked away with nothing. This wasn't about being fair. This was about making sure she paid. And I had the resources to make that happen. First move? I blocked her. Everywhere. No texts. No calls. No voicemails filled with shaky, fake remorse. If she needed to talk, she could go through my lawyers. Because as far as I was concerned, there was nothing left to say. The second she stepped out that door, she was already gone. Whatever care, whatever concern I had left for her, dead. The divorce dragged on. These things always do, especially when there's money involved. And we had a lot of it to fight over. The house, the assets, the business. It was all on the table. Melanie thought she could play hardball. She thought she was entitled to half. Thought she could walk away from this marriage with a fat bank account and a clean slate. But she underestimated me. Because Melanie? She had played dirty, but she had never played smart. And now? She was about to learn what it really meant to lose. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Melanie walked into this fight thinking she had a chance, that she could talk her way out of it, maybe even come out ahead. She thought I'd fold, that I'd let her walk away with half of everything, that I'd be another one of those men who get played and then pay for the privilege. She was wrong. She underestimated how far I was willing to go to make sure she got exactly what she deserved, and only what she deserved. The divorce process was long, drawn out, and ugly. Court dates, lawyer meetings, depositions, paperwork stacked so high it felt like I was signing away entire years of my life just to put her behind me. And not once did we speak. Every time we ended up in the same room, we sat on opposite sides, staring straight ahead, pretending the other didn't exist. I never looked at her, but I could feel her looking at me, maybe hoping for some kind of acknowledgement, some hint that I was still the man who used to love her. But that man was gone. Instead, all she got was silence. I'd catch glimpses of her, though, this hollow, fading version of the woman I once knew. She sat stiffly, her shoulders tight, her face carefully composed. But I saw through it. She was cracking, unraveling under the weight of it all. She had walked into this with confidence, thinking she could play the part of the wounded ex-wife, but it wasn't working. She was slipping, and she knew it. My lawyers tore her apart. They found every loophole, every clause in the prenup, every financial document that worked in my favor. They left nothing untouched, no detail overlooked. And then came the final blow, the photos. Evidence of her affair. Proof, undeniable and absolute. She couldn't explain it away. She couldn't spin it into something else. She had no defense, no clever excuse, no way to make herself look like the victim. She was caught, and the courts saw it for what it was, her choices, her actions, her destruction of our marriage. It dragged on for months, but I was patient. Every delay, every obstacle, every ridiculous demand she tried to push, I let it happen, knowing that in the end, I was winning. And I could see it in her face. The fight in her had drained away. She had gone from trying to battle me at every turn to barely showing up to hearings. She knew she had already lost. Then, finally, the day came. The judge handed down the final ruling. It was over, and it was everything I had wanted. I walked away with nearly everything. Our home, the business, the majority of our assets. Melanie? She got next to nothing. A small, temporary settlement that wouldn't last her more than a few months. She had convinced herself she'd be able to take half, that she'd get a clean break and a fat bank account to go along with it. But the court didn't see it that way. The evidence was stacked against her, and in the end, every major decision went in my favor. She tried to argue, tried to fight for more, but she had nothing left to stand on. I'll never forget the look on her face when the final ruling was read. Disbelief, anger, and something else, maybe regret. Maybe just the realization that this was real, that she had thrown everything away for nothing. I didn't care. All I knew was that I had won. She had tried to take everything from me. Instead, I had taken everything from her. When we left the courtroom that last day, I didn't say a word to her. There was nothing left to say. I walked out the door and never looked back. But here's the truth. Even after everything, even after winning, there's no real satisfaction in it. No moment of triumph. No deep, overwhelming feeling of justice being served. Just the quiet, empty aftermath of a marriage that should have ended long before it did. I won the battle. But the war? The war was hell. And nobody walks away from that untouched. For a long time, it felt like it would never really be over. The mess Melanie had created, the weight of it all, it felt permanent, like something I'd carry with me forever. But then, one day, I woke up and realized I wasn't thinking about her anymore. And that's when I knew it was finally over. The first few months after the divorce were rough. I thought I'd feel relief, thought I'd finally be able to breathe. But instead, I felt nothing. I had spent so long fighting, so long focused on taking her down, that when it was done, I didn't know what to do with myself. I had won. But now what? The years of history, the emotional scars, the weight of everything we had been. It didn't just disappear overnight. You don't flip a switch and suddenly feel whole again. You have to rebuild. And that takes time. I had to figure out who I was without her. Without the anger. Without the revenge. Because for so long, everything had been about her. Catching her. Exposing her. Destroying her. And when that was over, I had to figure out what was left of me. I threw myself into work. Pushed harder than ever. Expanded my business. Poured every ounce of energy into something productive. And it paid off. The company thrived. Financially, I was in a better position than I had ever been. And yeah, money doesn't solve everything. But let's be honest, it makes things a hell of a lot easier. Therapy helped too. I didn't want to admit I needed it. Didn't want to sit in front of some stranger and unpack everything. But I did it anyway. Because the truth is, you can't hold on to that kind of bitterness forever. It eats you alive. So, piece by piece, I let it go. It wasn't some overnight transformation. It was slow, like breaking down a wall, chipping away at it, until eventually, I could see what was on the other side. I started taking better care of myself. Got back into working out, eating right, making time for the things I actually enjoy. And it helped. Helped me build a life that felt mine again. Not just something left in the wreckage of what we used to be. But relationships? That's a different story. I'm not looking. Not interested. I don't trust the idea of love anymore. Not in the way I used to. After everything I've been through, it's hard to imagine letting anyone get that close again. Hard to imagine giving someone that kind of power over me. People say you shouldn't let one bad experience define you. But this wasn't just one bad experience. This was my entire world. And it collapsed. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Some people think you need someone to be whole. That life only has meaning when you have a partner. But I've learned the truth. You can be whole on your own. You can find peace, happiness, satisfaction, without needing someone else to give it to you. These days, my focus is on me, my work, my health, my future. I travel when I want. Spend time with friends. Live my life. No drama. No baggage. No weight pulling me down. It's simple. It's quiet. And it's exactly what I need. Will I ever change my mind? Maybe. Who knows what the future holds? But for now, I'm done with love. Done with relationships. Done with risking myself for someone else. I've learned the hard way, sometimes, the only person you can truly count on is yourself. And that's enough.